All right, hello everyone. Chapter 3. I'm wearing the same thing as Chapter 2 because I'm recording this back to back. So Chapter 3 is actually one of my favorite chapters. It is about perception. How I normally do this chapter is I start off by walking into the classroom the first day of school and acting really tough and being really like cold and not smiley. And I have everyone, after we go over the syllabus, write down their first impressions of me in a sentence or a few words, and I pass them up. And then I go back to being like who I am as a person. And then I go through Chapter 2. And then when we come to Chapter 3, we start talking about perception. And as soon as we start talking about perception, perception being the process through which we interpret our own experiences and unique understandings, I read everybody's first impression of me, and we talk about perception and how that influences the way we think about people. So with that, we are going to go ahead and launch into the PowerPoint, but I just wanted to share that with you. It is one of my favorite activities. So Chapter 3 is about perceiving perceiving the self and others. If I speak too quickly, let me know. This is actually a slide from when I teach in person. So perception is the cognitive process through which we interpret our experiences and come to our own unique understandings. It's the way we see the world, and our perceptions are our reality. The objectives of this course are to describe how our personal perspectives on the world influence our communication, to explain how we use and misuse schemas when communicating with others, to define the attributes we use to explain behavior, and to describe cultural differences that influence perception, identify how our self-concept, who we think we are, influences communication, and to describe how our cognitions about ourselves and our behavior affect communication with other people. Perception is so cool because we all have different perceptions of everything, and coming to a shared mutual understanding about those things is dope. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and launch into communication processing. I couldn't see that. We're going to put this down here. All right, so communication processing is the process of gathering, organizing, and evaluating the information we receive. It also involves our basic senses along with personal factors. And we also hope noise from Chapter 1, like noise, doesn't get in the way of that processing. Like if we're receiving information while we're texting, that could definitely get in the way of our perception of things. All right, so the perception process. Through the perception process, we select information. Words are tools. We talked about that in Chapter 1. The words we choose are tools to help us create shared meaning, and the word itself is not the item. They're two different things, and the word we've chosen assigns meaning to that item so that we can all talk about that item, and we all agree that that item means that thing, right? So we organize our perceptions, we interpret our perceptions, and then we improve our perceptions. Schemas. So schemas are the mental structures that put together like related bits of information. They help us understand how things work or should work. And they evolve and change over time, like interaction appearance theory, right? Like when we are trying to understand something like how class works or how we think a class works, we read the syllabus and then we get a little bit of information, and then we go to the first lecture and the professor talks about it, and then we get a little bit more information, and then we put together these mental structures of what these ideas or these things should look like. So there are a couple challenges with schemas and perception, and one of those is mindlessness. So when we're really, really passive about information, or when we're really, really passive about when we receive information, like if we're like texting and not thinking super deeply about the thing that someone just told us, it makes it a lot easier to forget, right? Like when we're being really, really mindless. And then selective perception is only receiving the information that we want. So if like we're in an argument with somebody and somebody's like accusing you of doing something, and then they say, but I guess you're right, and then you only hear that you're right, and you're like, yeah, I am right. So just like choosing the bits of information that we want to hear. And then distorted perception. So distorted perception is distorting of events based on vivid information. Sometimes we distort the truth in our own heads and to make things more comfortable for us, right? So like sometimes when something's really uncomfortable, we distort the truth to make ourselves more comfortable. All right, we're not going to group up. All right, but we are going to talk about how to improve our perceptions. So when improving our perceptions, we're going to be thoughtful when seeking explanations. We're going to consider the perspective of the other person, like easier said than done. It's way easier to say you're going to put yourself in their shoes than to actually do it. Look beyond the first impression, which is the point that I try to prove in my beginning activity, where I have everybody write down their first perception of me or first impression of me when I'm trying to be all tough. And half the time I get like strict professor, mean, cold. One time I got boss bitch. But like there are a ton of different like things that we like judge off based on just our first perception. And then we're going to question our assumptions, because sometimes we just have things that we've been told to us our entire life, and sometimes those things just aren't true. Like this is a really silly example of this, but I think I was like reading a meme and someone said that her family had a distinct bird call, and they would make this bird call in grocery stores to find each other. And she just thought that every family had a bird call. And she just thought that every family had a bird call. And she was at the grocery store with her friend and they couldn't find her mom. And she's like, well, what's your bird call? And that's just not something that they had. Or like another one that I read was, this one's a little bit grosser, but still kind of funny. Like a guy would have like a poop knife at his house to cut it up to make sure it flushed and went down like smoothly when he'd flush the toilet so it didn't clog. We went over to his friend's house and asked his friend for the poop knife, and his friend was just absolutely floored about the poop knife. And then when also we're looking to improve our perceptions, we need to consider the channels that are being used, right? Like it's so much easier to consider like social media as a good form of communication versus talking face to face like FaceTime. Like it's so much easier to misinterpret something that may have happened in that interaction, right? Like I just have such a hard time telling at times if people are like making a joke or if they actually just said that. And so it's really, really important to be aware of, especially in a social context. Like there are so many memes that you can miss, and then someone makes a meme joke and you just don't get it. Like that probably has never happened to any of you because you're on top of it, but I don't know, I'm getting older, I miss memes, and sometimes I just don't get jokes. It took me forever to figure out what TikTok was, besides a song by Kesha that came out a long time ago. All right, so perceptions in a diverse world. Culture totally affects how we perceive ourselves and others. Some cultures are super family oriented, some cultures are super individualistic, and they're so important to consider when we're talking to different people that didn't grow up the same way we grew up. So that's something that's really important for us to consider moving forward. The cultural context. So culture is made up of different variables that makes our perceptions unique. That's diversity. And it's effective and appropriate communication that involves our understanding and appreciating perceptions, both your own and others. So it's really important to consider like all perspectives when moving forward, trying to communicate with someone that may be from a different culture than you. All right, some perceptual barriers that we may run into when perceiving things is having a narrow perspective. Having a narrow perspective can be super problematic when members of a society are unaware of or insensitive towards the needs or values of others that may not be the same as yours, right? Or even stereotyping. Fitting others into an existing schema without adjusting the schema appropriately. Stereotyping can be positive, negative, or neutral, but stereotyping is probably problematic no matter what, because not everybody fits into the stereotypical box that you fit them into. Another perceptual barrier can be prejudice, which is something that can be learned, or something that is learned through I don't know, through families, through friends, through the way you grew up, and their feelings of unkindness or ill will towards a particular group based on preconceived notions, usually based on negative stereotypes and feelings of superiority over those groups. So it's really important for us to check those biases when we're engaging with these different perceptions and when we're engaging with people that have different backgrounds than the ones that we grew up with. We're not going to do the free write. You don't have to do it. But it is really important to just take a second and think about a time that you've been stereotyped or had someone stereotype you and how that made you feel. How your specific worldview influences your perceptions and the way you think about the world. Have you ever thought about the way that you perceive yourself? And how is it different from the way that others perceive you? And then how does it help communication to put perception into perspective? How can that help or hurt even communication? So you don't have to write those down, but just like take a second, think about it, pause the video if you need to. But these are really important questions to consider when thinking about like perception and how infrequently we actually consider perception. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about cognition about ourselves. So self-concept is who we think we are. Self-concept is your understanding of who you are, shaped through thinking about your strengths and weaknesses and observing yourself in a variety of situations. Self-concept shapes your communication with others. When you interact with others, you get impressions from them about how they evaluate you, and that information gets reincorporated into your self-concept. When you communicate with others, you get information that can affect the way that you think about yourself. This information comes in the following forms, whether that's direct evidence, compliments, insults, support, or negative remarks, or even indirect evidence, like revealed through innuendo, subtle nonverbal cues, or lack of communication. All right, self-esteem. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. Self-esteem is the way that a person feels or their attitude about themselves. Self-concept is tied to self-esteem, and that you must first know yourself before you have an attitude about yourself. People with high self-esteem are typically more confident in the way they think, do things, or perform. And those with low self-esteem often lack information about themselves, mistrust themselves, mistrust the knowledge they possess, or make unreasonable comparisons to themselves or others. And then self-efficacy. I'm actually doing a sports study on this right now. Self-efficacy is assessing your own abilities. Self-efficacy is the ability to predict actual success from self-concept or self-esteem. So people with high levels of self-efficacy sometimes make people overconfident. People really, really often avoid situations where they believe their self-efficacy to be very low. And then feelings of low self-efficacy can cause people to dwell on shortcomings, interpret different events negatively, and therefore can lower self-esteem. And then we talk a little bit about self-fulfilling prophecy, which is a prediction that causes an individual to alter their behavior in a way that makes the prediction more likely to occur, which is really interesting. We go through all of these in the next few slides. I will go through them again. Self-concept is who you think you are, influenced by actions, abilities, values, goals, and ideals. It's it influences how you communicate with others through indirect and direct evidence. It also is tied to social comparison theory, and social comparison theory, which I passed in my notes, don't worry. Social comparison theory effectively is when we compare ourselves on social media and when we compare ourselves to other people, and that effectively doesn't allow us to make adequate distinctions about ourselves because we're too busy looking at ourselves when juxtaposed with other people as opposed to looking at ourselves as an individual. Yeah. Self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, a set of attitudes that you hold about your own emotions, thoughts, abilities, behaviors, and beliefs. Linked to self-concept, we talked about this. And self-actualization. This one we haven't talked about yet. Self-actualization is feelings and thoughts that result from unsuccessfully negotiating a communication situation. And it can lead to fulfillment and satisfaction. Self-adequacy is addressing your communication competence as sufficient or acceptable, and it can lead to contentment or self-improvement depending on the way that you decide to look at it. Self-denigration is a negative assessment or self-criticism about a communication experience. Denigration, that's the word. Often occurs when communicators place undue importance on their weaknesses, preventing improvement. And then self-efficacy, the ability to project actual success based on your self-concept and self-esteem, affects your ability to interpret events and cope with failure and success. Inaccurate self-efficacy can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies, which we talked about earlier. An example that we talked about in a previous course was a girl didn't think she could ski, didn't want to try skiing, and therefore couldn't ski, which led to self-fulfilling prophecy. Didn't want to try it, didn't think she could, therefore did not. Self-fulfilling prophecy. And then it eventually leads to thinking, like, if you think you can, then you probably can, right? Self-fulfilling prophecies are real. And self-efficacy, I'm actually doing a study on right now. Self-efficacy effectively is like the ability to predict success based on your self-concept and your self-esteem and the ability to think that you can do something well. I'm doing a study on athletes and the messages coaches tell them that help predict whether or not they think that they could do something well on their own, right? Which is really interesting. So technology and managing the self and perception. Self-presentation can be more controlled online than on person. You could do multiple takes or not. You could do one take and submit it and be like, that's it, that's one. And we can make conscious choices about what we choose to reveal to others. Others may create perceptions about you based on what you reveal. Media platforms allow you to show yourself at the best advantage with different audiences because you have the opportunity to re-record if you don't like it, or choose what you decide to disclose and monitor what you choose to disclose. You're not going to do that. But all that to say, if you're going to take away anything from this chapter, I would go ahead and take a look at self-concept, self-esteem, and self-efficacy and the definitions of perception. Perception is so important in the context of communication and understanding others, and self-disclosure, what we choose to share with other people. We often use self-disclosure to confirm or improve our self-esteem or obtain reassurance. And this feedback is often incorporated back into ourselves based on our sensitivity levels to feedback. So I would take away those terms. I would go through the lecture on your own, and I would go ahead and email me if you have any questions. All that to say, this is one of my favorite chapters, and I'm so glad I got to share it with you. And I look forward to the next video. Have a good day, guys. Bye.